Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk a little bit about Neon Genesis Evangelion. This is not going to be the longest analysis ever, but I do want to address this because I've kind of promised it. And I think there's a lot to dig into here. So a little bit of background. I know there's tons of fans of this particular anime. I was not into it back when it was current in the 90s. I never watched it, and I guess it was on cable in the aughts. I didn't have cable, so I didn't watch it then. So I'm new to it. I'm a noob to Neon Genesis, and I got to miss most of the hype. But the hype kind of returned because it came to Netflix, which is where I watched it. So you may now write down in the comments about what a hypocrite I am for continuing to have a Netflix subscription. But that's where I watched it. Watched one episode per day while I was doing cardio, usually. And that gave me a lot of time to think about what was going on and to really evaluate this particular series. And I'm going to be looking at the series plus the movie because that encapsulates the entire story. And because I'm looking at so many different things, so many different episodes, I'm going to avoid the number system. And it'll become obvious as we go because assigning a number that encapsulates everything would actually not tell enough of the story for me to really say it's a proper analysis. So I'm putting the number system to the side, but I'll still talk about the categories just to address everything. So here's my big overview of it. I think it's an anime that certainly can suck you in at the beginning. It's big on style. It's big on big ideas, really big ideas, good, big sci-fi ideas. But it's very uneven with its story execution, and there's a bunch of little problems with what it does with its story, especially as the series goes on. Now, to be fair, I guess the writer, Hideaki Anno, was having some sort of breakdown or something while producing the show, so the content of the show and its direction starts to shift. As a result of that, that's not necessarily a good thing. If you are writing the show to try to deal with your own demons, then you're really selling a product to the customer that they didn't want. So that actually becomes a problem as it goes on, as well as the budgetary and scheduling problems that the production company had, till the point where they eventually ran out of money and had to cobble together the final 2 episodes. And that culminates really in, I guess, the worst finale I've ever seen in a series, which is the final 2 episodes of the original series. Those actually get kind of replaced by the movie The Death of Evangelion. You can also watch another movie that's basically like a clip show of the actual series. I think it's called Neon Genesis Evangelion Death True Squared on Netflix. I would recommend, if you're going to want to watch this, just watch the series. You can maybe skip the last 2 episodes and watch The Death of Evangelion and then go back and watch those final 2 episodes. Because believe it or not, I think after having seen the whole thing, I like those 2 better than I did when I was just watching them in context. And I think they leave a better taste in your mouth than the end of the movie. And I'll dig a little bit into that as we go. So it's very inconsistent and uneven. And so the end result is, I'm not a huge fan of it, but there's definitely some parts about it that are great, and I do want to start with the positives more than I dig into the negatives. So I would say that the episodes really start to change. This is a really interesting thing about the series, is that it starts off as a mecha anime with a really basic and easy to understand setup. We have mechas and we're fighting kaiju. And they call the kaiju angels. So before I go further, there's a ton of word use that's borrowed from the Book of Enoch. That's where they get the name of the angels, I think. And I've talked about Book of Enoch on this channel before, but also just biblical symbolism like crucifixion and use of the words like Eve, Adam, Lilith, which is also from Book of Enoch. Book of Enoch is apocryphal, by the way. It's not biblical, but it's a very interesting book, and I noticed that a lot of people kind of drawing on biblical stuff outside of greater Christendom tend to really like the Book of Enoch. It's a very interesting and compelling mythological book, so they pull some stuff from that. Just put that to the side. I think that's mostly painted over a story that's more about aliens than anything else, and then about kind of the future of humanity, which is another weird thing that they do in it. So the show starts off as a mecha anime, and then after episode 10 to 15, it starts to slowly transform from a mecha show where the repeating setup is going to be we fight a kaiju, and each kaiju has a new power that we have to learn to overcome. We have to grow to get better to destroy the kaiju, into more of a science fiction psychological thriller kind of anime that mechas are kind of auxiliary to, or just incidental, because they're there from the establishment. And it becomes much more about like character drama and character introspection, and thematically it goes from being about this survival thing to being really about solipsism and loneliness and questionable nihilism. Like, does any of this matter, right? Is there anything outside of me that's real? That's solipsism. And that was something that really affected a lot of artists in the 90s for some reason. The music was about solipsism. Lots of literature was solipsistic. Solipsism, which was a big thing in the 19th century, was like roaring back in the 90s. And this, I think this entire anime, both the movie and the episodes, the TV episodes, are really dealing with solipsism head on, and that's like a big unifying theme once you get past the first couple of episodes. And so you also have this problem as it changes, you're like, I'm not watching the show I liked initially. Maybe you like the psychological parts of the show better than the mecha stuff, but to me it was kind of sold as a mecha, and then it changed. For good or bad, it changed, and so that starts to be a little bit weird. Like you're watching a different product than you initially were watching, and it kind of leaves your head scratching with a lot of stuff. This, at the same time, a lot of the promises about the nature of the world and the world building, which is very interesting initially, they're mystery boxes. What's in the box? Those things don't get delivered on throughout the entire series, including the final movie. We're left with a bunch of questions, and we're left with an ending that really feels very unsatisfying any way you want to cut it. We don't see the characters do what they need to do, and we don't see the world do what it needs to do. We don't see the plot progress in a way that is what anyone would really want. It just kind of goes off into left field after a while, and that to me was pretty unsatisfying. And both of the endings end up being pretty unsatisfying, but I think after watching the movie I like the TV episode ones. After that, they have a little better taste in your mouth. So let's dig into some of my categories and just talk about them. So production really varies with the TV episodes. In general, they're high production quality towards the beginning, and they get lower towards the end. Fewer animation frames, more leaning on some of the stuff that animation studios do in Japan to cut down on the amount of stuff they have to animate, which is like panning still shots and things like that. If you're aware of how they do those techniques, you see more and more of them come up where they're way less obvious in the first couple of episodes. First couple of episodes, the animation is very smooth. I love the aesthetic designs that they had going on. I thought the mechs are really cool looking. I liked that they had a monstrous appearance to them. I liked that they looked a little bit different than, say, Gundam or, Stompy mechs kind of stuff. Kind of outside of those two kind of extremes, you have something that looked a little bit more slithery, a little bit more modern, at least for the 90s, and were brightly colored, which I also liked. Now, the cell animation that was used, especially as you'll notice in the TV episodes, was actual cell animation, hand drawn. And that produces a very different aesthetic than what you may get from a modern anime show, which is done on a computer, where everything's fully saturated and all the color tones are even. In this case, there's film grain. There's also a lot of the colors look a lot more washed out because the backgrounds are often watercolored and things to get everything to come together. You're not using really super saturated colors. But I like the aesthetic a lot more. I think it looks more real. I think getting outside the digital space, they used a lot more animation techniques that are just lost in the digital space, like you see twinkling lights in the cities and things like that you just are not going to see very much in the newer animation shows, even if this individual cells look very highly detailed and very smooth. You also have a thing where, in general, the faces look way more dynamic on this old stuff. I feel like we've really lost something by losing the old cell animation style. So the faces are more dynamic, more varied. The angles at which characters are drawn are more varied. There's so much more you get from that classic animation style. If you go look at the movie, it's that classic animation style, but you have the saturation turned up. So the cells are much more smooth. The animation's even more smooth. Everything looks great in the movie. The movie just has really top-notch production aesthetics. You get some really bizarre-looking scenes that are nightmarish, and they're all animated and drawn really well. So the aesthetics, in general, are pretty top-notch. The problem is, in that original show, as they start to run out of time and money, it goes downhill, and we get to see less of those aesthetics. You're leaning on fewer frames of animation and relying on a lot more voiceover kind of stuff. The last thing I'll mention is the sound particularly in the TV episodes was surprisingly good. They had all this presence of use of echo, silence, and then of course buzzing. When you're in man-made environments, there's this buzzing machine sound. When you're outside, then you hear the clacking of cicadas in nature. So they have this odd, almost oppressive background noise all the time that actually I think enhances the ambience and the mood of the pieces and makes everything feel a little bit more intense. I was surprised by how effective that was, but it may have just been something they put on so that there's not just a ton of silence in the show as they're showing you different pieces of animation. But in general, it was really effective. So let's move on to story. This is the main thing where there's a lot of problems. So the setting is very interesting, at least from the get-go, when you are looking at it as a series of promises. I want to know where these EVAs come from. I want to know why these kids have to be the ones to pilot these EVAs. I want to know what this geofront is. Why is there a pyramid? What the second impact really was, what they actually were doing and what they were trying to do in the second impact, what exactly happened, how these organizations came to exist, like Nerve and SEAL, and who they are, what their final aim is, and we get answers to almost none of those throughout the course of the entire series plus the movie. We never really have a satisfactory answer as to why Shinji is special or why any of the kids are special. But we get this idea that they are special and that they need 14-year-olds to pilot it. But why? They never really adequately answer that, at least to my taste. So you're just kind of left questioning why. We don't really know why Gendo is doing everything he's doing. He's a very distant character, and then we kind of figure out why he's doing something in the end of the movie. But it seems like his aims are the same aims as the people who are attacking him. So I'm not really sure how each of their main goals differ significantly. It seems like they both want to turn everybody into LCL mush and like merge all souls into one, which is actually an outcome that to me is really gross and unsatisfying. To me, it was like the good guys, the people trying to defend humanity, were trying to kill it all along. So why would you bothering to fight off all of these kaiju? It's like, well, it was in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, we never find out what was in the Dead Sea Scrolls, what it said, why they mentioned it, other than kind of what I call indirect exposition. Everything's done through indirect exposition, which is very effective for making you want to watch more so that you get the answer, so that you uncover more of the way things work. But a lot of things we just are left with curiously going, well, I guess it looked cool. It was cool that the buildings came up out of the ground. It was cool that there was the pyramid. It was cool that the Evas are actually weird giant men that they made, but we don't know how they made them, but they don't have souls. We don't really know why Rey has these clones, I guess so she can have a clone body if she dies. We just have to kind of piece a lot of things together, and a lot of it becomes unclear, especially at the end. We just aren't really sure why people are doing things, like what the real motivations of most of the people are. In fact, we end up with a conclusion where like the cataclysm and all the events are really caused by the people who are fighting against the so-called angels to begin with. So that's a problem. The characters also have a trajectory at the beginning. We have these characters that they all have a flaw, and we're looking for them to correct their flaws, and they are correcting their flaws. So Shinji is a coward, and he's becoming braver. We have Asuka, who's a shrew, and she's learning how to deal with other people. She's really arrogant. She's learning to dial back her self-importance and learn to work with Shinji. And they have to like share a space together, and it's a really good opportunity for character growth. And then we even have, potential for growth with like Gendo and some of those crowds. We have potential for growth with, say, like Katsuragi, the major, who's running the actual affairs of how they're going to fight the kaiju. We have all those opportunities for growth, and then the show just starts to change. So not only do the characters not grow, do we not get to see more of them and get to see them do what we know they need to do in order to better themselves and become heroes. We see them backslide and do weirder and weirder things where rather than Asuka kind of evening out, she has a complete ego collapse, and then that's never fixed. That just is like the end of her character in the series, and then we get the fix for it finally in the movie. It takes all the way to the end of the movie to have her character arc kind of just even out to where we want it to be. Meanwhile, Shinji just continues to get worse and worse, and by the time we get to the movie, he's straight up contemptible. not only does he never fix his coward problem, like the first time he runs away and comes back, we're like, great, he's learning bravery and he's getting, braver and braver. He even becomes foolhardy at one point and gets sucked into this weird giant angel has like a pocket dimension in it. And basically gets punished for going too far in the other direction. But then again, he just collapses, even to the point where when we get to the movie, there's a scene where he masturbates after seeing Asuka's breasts. And at that point, the character goes over a boundary, in my opinion, from being, quote, a flawed character to one which is simply contemptible. We have pity for a lonely, cowardly boy. We have contempt for a lustful, disgusting perv. And so at that point, Shinji really becomes a lost character, and they never redeem him. In fact, the movie ends with him attempting to choke and kill Asuka, and just leaves a really bad taste in your mouth. So it's better to watch those final 2 episodes where Shinji is coming to grips with himself and his relationship with other people. That's a much better flavor than what you end the movie with, in my opinion. The entire movie is really about how Shinji is just a terrible person. And he feels like a terrible person, and he acts in the way that he feels. So he is terrible. It's not just like, I'm depressed and feel bad. Oh, no, I have to save my friends. I'll get some courage. It's more like, just continue to collapse until everybody gets turned to mush, because there was really no point in what I was doing anyway. So we don't really get the completion of those character growth arcs to much satisfaction at all. And that's a problem as well. Lastly, the plot, because it shifts so much what the story's about, we lose track of what the plot is about. Originally, we think it's about defending people against kaiju, and then it becomes about some deeper intrigue with the Nerve organization and what they're trying to do with this corpse of this alien that they call Lilith, and it just never really comes together, so we never really know exactly what's going on. And so the plot just kind of leaves the world building behind for the most part. But in general, most of the things come off pretty good towards the beginning, and indeed, the final movie really has a lot of great action set pieces and does a pretty good job explaining a lot of that stuff, other than Shinji really becomes completely intolerable. Likewise, Gendo, who's his father, really becomes pretty much an irredeemable character at that point, and really gross. There's a lot of gross stuff in that movie that I think is just way too much. Like it's one thing to have young teenage characters, they're all like 14, having basic sexuality exploration, which is like they kiss each other and stuff. But it's quite another to have them like masturbating in front of each other, like masturbating to an unconscious teenage girl. It's really, really pretty gross. It leaves a pretty bad taste in your mouth. So in general, I didn't like most of those character elements in the movie at all, even though the action set pieces were quite good. So the general effect is one that I think is really uneven. It's one that I can't really say I'm a fan of it. There's things that I like about it. I like the aesthetics. I like some of the ideas they were trying to go with. Don't really care for their attempt to paste on Book of Enoch symbolism. I don't think it really works that well. And I think as the series progressed going into the movie, you just end up with what amounts to poor story execution, where you're not delivering on any promises to your viewer, and you leave the viewer with a really unsatisfied feeling, and me, the viewer. So that's what I think about Neon Genesis Evangelion. Overall, not bad. There's certainly things that, it held my attention long enough for me to complete it, which is really something. And to be honest, it made me think a lot about this stuff, but I realized at a certain point that all of the Book of Enoch stuff was just kind of misdirection. I was spending a bunch of time thinking, like, what are they're going to do with this? Because this is what this is who Lilith is. And in reality, it just isn't that significant. It's not as symbolic, I think, as they're intending to, or they didn't understand what they were trying to use allegorically. So it just is kind of non-functional. So I just wouldn't worry about that. I'd ignore it and not be too worried about the blasphemy and stuff there, and just watch the series if you want to watch it. So anyway, leave me your thoughts down below about what you think about it if you watch it, and maybe what some of your favorite parts were, what the most effective parts were, and especially the character Shinji. I'm wondering because it seems like most people don't like him, and they share my opinion of him that he's kind of a contemptible character towards the end. So leave me your thoughts about him. Maybe you end up liking him or really identifying with him. My overall thoughts is this feels like something from the 90s. And if you were around in the 90s, this was a lot of the attitude. People were very into psychology. People were very into solipsism. They were into like the self and the other and thinking about their feelings. And this was all stuff that was really kind of booming in the 90s in art, in whether it's series or music or books. All this stuff was getting big in the 90s. And so it kind of fits right in that space in the 90s as far as that goes. And now looking at it divorced from the 90s, a lot of those things I think kind of fall flat and just aren't very effective in general. So I would have liked to have seen it with a little bit better effective storytelling, but they were dealing with their limitations, as well as a writer who decided to change what the product was like midway through production, which you probably don't want to do. You don't want to start writing a fantasy book and end by writing, I don't know, a romance novel. That's not going to usually work out for you. So I think that's generally the big misstep, was the execution of the story. So let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys next time. Newest book. Where is it? Tyrant Scala. Boom. It's book 2, though, so you should start by reading book 1, City of Silver, and then read book 2, Tyrant Scala, where they go to Pirate Island. And that's a lot of fun. And, of course, you can read Keys to Prolific Creativity, which is all about setting up your work routine and your life so that you can get your projects done, get your writing done, or get your music projects done, or your art projects. It's really just about how to be a creative professional in the world of independent creation. So thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time.